The wind whispered through the trees as the first toll of the bell echoed from the ancient ruins of St. Michael's Abbey. In the valley below, the village slept beneath a blanket of fog, the kind that clung to the earth like a living thing. The bell's mournful chime sliced through the night, sharp and unrelenting, as though it had been waiting for this moment for centuries. There was no one left to hear it, yet the sound seemed to reach every corner of the forgotten world. It was the toll of a curse that had begun long ago, when blood stained the stones of the abbey and betrayal hung heavy in the air like the scent of decaying leaves. St. Michael's Abbey, once a place of worship and peace, had become a silent monument to a forgotten tragedy. The abbey itself was crumbling, its stone walls cracked and overgrown with ivy. The once grand tower, where the bell was housed, stood at a crooked angle, leaning as though the weight of the past had finally caused it to bend under its burden. Yet still, the bell rang. The villagers spoke little of it. They only nodded when the question was asked, their eyes darting nervously to the horizon. Everyone knew the legend, the tale of the massacre that had taken place within the abbey's walls, a tale of betrayal so dark that even time had not been able to erase it. The bell had tolled the night of that massacre, and it had tolled every night since. Every chime was a reminder of the blood that had soaked into the stones, of the men and women whose lives had been stolen in a single, brutal night. It began centuries ago, in the early days of the abbey's construction. The monks who had come to St. Michael's to pray and live in solitude were not the first to occupy the land, but they were the first to build a sanctuary on the site. The abbey had been founded upon a promise, one made by the land's original ruler, a powerful lord whose name had long since been forgotten. He had sworn that this place would stand as a beacon of peace for all who sought refuge. But peace was a fragile thing. As the years passed, the Lord's family grew weak, their power diminished, and the abbey became more of a shelter for those seeking sanctuary than a place of governance. The Lord's youngest son, a man by the name of Lord Alistair, had taken an interest in the abbey's daily operations, despite the fall of his family's name. As a young man, Alistair had been consumed with ambition, desperate to reclaim his family's honor. He had become a frequent visitor to the abbey, bringing with him promises of restoration and wealth to the monks who had so long lived in seclusion. But Alistair's interest in the abbey was not one of spiritual salvation. No, his mind was darkened by thoughts of vengeance. The Lord's line had been betrayed, its riches stolen by rival families, and Alistair had sworn that he would restore what had been taken. But his lust for power had clouded his judgment, and he turned to darker methods to achieve his goal. One fateful night, under the cover of darkness, he brought with him a group of mercenaries, brutal men who cared for nothing but blood and gold. They stormed the abbey, slaughtering the monks as they slept. The bell rang then, loud and desperate, but it could not stop the massacre. The monks' cries were drowned by the tolling of the bell, their lives snuffed out in an instant. The blood of the innocent stained the stone floors, and the echoes of the bells rang long into the night, calling to something that none of them could understand. When the morning sun rose, it illuminated the scene of unspeakable horror. The bell, once a symbol of sanctuary, had become a harbinger of death. And so the curse began. The bell would toll again and again, its mournful chime echoing through the valley as the years passed. No one could explain why it rang, for the abbey had long since been abandoned, its ruins slowly overtaken by nature. Yet still, the bell tolled. The villagers who lived nearby would never forget the sound. It haunted their dreams, ringing through the stillness of the night, a constant reminder of the violence that had occurred on the abbey's grounds. As time passed, the legend of the cursed bell grew. Whispers spread from mouth to mouth, and the abbey became a place of terror. No one dared venture near the ruins, for it was said that the spirits of the slain monks still wandered the grounds, trapped between life and death. It was the young and the curious who were most affected by the bell. Children who ventured too close to the ruins would return with pale faces, their eyes wide with fear, claiming they had seen shadows in the windows of the bell tower. They spoke of cold winds that seemed to blow from within the walls of the abbey, despite the stillness of the night. And the bell, oh, the bell, it rang for them too. The children spoke of how the bell had tolled for them, how its sound seemed to call them closer, as if it were a siren's song beckoning them into the darkness. Some children were never seen again, their voices lost in the wind, swallowed by the cursed sound of the bell. The villagers, of course, dismissed such talk as the imaginings of youth, but even they couldn't escape the feeling of dread that lingered in the air around St. Michael's Abbey. There were those who claimed to have heard the bell toll in the dead of night, though no one could explain why. The bell had been silent for decades, its ropes rotting with time, its mechanism rusted and broken. Yet it rang. On rare occasions, a lone traveler would come through the village, seeking shelter from the cold. They would be offered a bed and a warm meal, but the villagers would always warn them, "Do not stay too long. The bell will toll, and when it does, you must leave." Those who ignored the warning often met with tragic ends. The bell would toll, and the next morning, the traveler would be gone, vanished without a trace, as though the very earth had swallowed them whole. The villagers believed that the curse of the abbey had claimed yet another victim. No one knew exactly what lay within the abbey, but they were certain that the bell was its herald, signaling the arrival of death. Now, as the centuries rolled by, the abbey remained silent in the dark of night. But still the bell rang. The sound cut through the fogs and the stillness, echoing across the valley. No one knew who or what was ringing it, but the curse endured, unbroken. The village, its people long gone, stood as a silent witness to the horrors that had once been. And so the legend of St. Michael's Abbey endured, wrapped in the chilling toll of the bell, a tale of betrayal, of bloodshed, and of a curse that could never be undone. The bell would toll for as long as the earth stood, its sound forever etched into the fabric of the valley's history. It was the toll of death, the sound of the past calling out, forever echoing through the darkened night. There is a place hidden in the heart of Italy where the night is never completely silent. The village of Sant'Agrippina, though small and seemingly ordinary, has long been steeped in mystery, its peaceful streets often overshadowed by the haunting toll of its church bells. These bells, like the ones of St. Michael's Abbey, have a peculiar resonance, their tolls carrying an eerie sorrow that vibrates deep within the chest. It is a sound that drifts through the air, and with it comes a sense of inevitability, a premonition that something is about to happen, something that cannot be escaped. The bells of Sant'Agrippina ring not with the joy of celebration, but with a sorrowful toll that has marked the passing of many a soul. Locals say that they toll only when someone near death is close. It is a warning of what is to come. And yet, strangely, no one can predict when the bells will ring next. These bells are not bound by time nor by logic. They ring when they choose, and they never fail to strike with chilling accuracy. The legend of these bells stretches back centuries to a time when Sant'Agrippina was a place of pilgrimage, a village built around the sanctuary of the saint herself, who had been martyred centuries before. The bells had been installed in the cathedral by the people as a tribute to her, a symbol of their faith and their reverence. But as the years passed, something darker took root in the town. It is said that the bell tower of the church had been cursed from the moment the first bell was forged. There are whispers among the oldest residents of Santa Agrippina, voices thick with the weight of age and experience, that the bells were not blessed in the way they should have been. They claim that a dark deal had been struck between the village priest and a mysterious stranger, a man whose features were never fully seen, whose words were smooth and persuasive. He had come to the village one evening, his cloak billowing behind him, his eyes glinting with something sinister. The stranger offered the priest a gift, something that could bring prosperity and health to the village, something that would ensure their peace and safety for generations to come. The priest, eager to fulfill his duties and gain the village's favor, accepted without question. But what the priest did not know was that this gift would come at a terrible cost. The bells, they say, were forged with the soul of a man who had been wronged in life, a soul bound to the metal by a curse that would never allow it to rest. It was said that, upon the first toll of the bells, something had awakened. The people of Santa Agrippina would never speak of it directly, but they knew, deep down, that the bells carried more than just the echoes of faith. They were the harbingers of death, each toll an omen for the soul soon to be lost. The bells began to toll at night, and not just any night, but on nights when something terrible was to happen, when someone's life was about to be claimed by an unseen hand. No one knew how the bells knew this, whether they were simply in tune with the rhythm of fate, or if there was something far darker at play. It wasn't long before the village began to see a pattern. The bells would toll only when someone was near death, and the village's residents soon began to speak in hushed tones about the tolling bells and the presence of the mysterious stranger, whose shadow had long since disappeared from their memories. His name was lost to time, but his gift, the curse, remained. It was said that when the bells tolled, it marked the death of a person, sometimes within hours, sometimes within days. But always, the tolling bells signaled a life that was slipping away. No one dared to ignore the toll. The village would hold its breath in those moments, waiting for the news that inevitably followed. Sometimes it was a sudden death. A man who had been in perfect health, found cold and lifeless in his bed. Other times, it was a lingering illness, where the tolling bells seemed to prolong the suffering, echoing through the air as though to make the agony last just a little longer. The people, though fearful, learned to accept the tolls as part of their existence, as something they could not escape. The strangest part of the legend, however, was the toll of the bells when no one had yet died. This occurrence became more frequent as time went on, and as it did, the village grew uneasy. The bells would toll at night, when there were no deaths, no illness, no reason for their ringing. It was as though the bells had taken on a life of their own, ringing not just to mark a death, but to forewarn of a coming tragedy. One such night, the bells tolled at midnight, as they often did. But this time, it was not the expected distant sound that they had grown accustomed to. This time, the toll was louder, more insistent. It felt as though the very earth trembled with each chime, as though the bells were not ringing in the bell tower at all, but deep beneath the ground, in some forgotten tomb. The villagers gathered in the square, their faces pale with fear, watching the dark church tower, waiting for some sign. And then it came. A scream tore through the night, so primal, so raw, that it seemed to reverberate through every building in the village. It was followed by silence, an all-encompassing silence that seemed to hang in the air, thick with dread. When the villagers rushed to the source of the scream, they found a young woman, her body sprawled upon the cobbled street. Her eyes were wide with terror, her mouth frozen in an expression of agony. There was no wound, no obvious sign of harm, but it was clear that the toll of the bells had been too much for her. She had not been ill. She had not been suffering. But when the bells tolled that night, it was as though they had called her forth, summoned her to the very edge of death. The villagers knew then that the toll of the bells had grown even darker. The bells were no longer simply harbingers of death. They were the gatekeepers, the ones who marked who would go and when. And from that night forward, the toll of the bells became something far more dangerous. As the years passed, Santa Agrippina's curse deepened. More and more people began to disappear after hearing the toll. The bells, once a symbol of mourning, had become something more. Something that spoke not just of death, but of despair, of terror. They toll not just for those who are dying, but for those whose souls are fated to wander in between life and death, lost and searching for peace. The priest who had forged the pact with the mysterious stranger is long gone, his name lost to the annals of time. But the bells remain, tolling for the lost souls of Santa Agrippina, tolling for those who have yet to find their peace. And when the bells toll in the dead of night, the villagers no longer sleep. They listen, and they wait. In the shadows of Eastern Europe, nestled deep within the dense woods and forgotten valleys, there lies a hill that no living soul dares to approach after the sun dips beneath the horizon. It is known as the Forgotten Hill, a place so shrouded in mystery that even the bravest of wanderers avoid its jagged peaks. It is a place steeped in superstition, where every step feels weighted with the burden of history. From the moment the hill rises before you, it is as though the air thickens, carrying with it an oppressive sense of doom, an unseen force watching, waiting, listening. Atop this hill stands an ancient bell tower, its silhouette a stark reminder of a time long past. The tower itself is a crumbling ruin, its stones worn by centuries of wind, rain, and forgotten wars. Yet the bell, despite the ravages of time, remains intact, a silent sentinel that has been ringing long after its makers disappeared from the land. The bell's toll, unlike any other, is not bound by the physical world. It does not merely echo across the land. It resonates in the very bones of those who hear it. It carries with it a weight, a heaviness that lingers long after the sound has faded into the night. The locals, when asked about the bell, fall silent. They exchange uneasy glances, the air thick with unspoken words, and then, with an almost imperceptible nod, they turn away. They know better than to speak of it. To utter its name aloud is to invite the curse that comes with it, a curse that has claimed the lives of those who dared to seek answers, those who ventured too close to the bell's mournful toll. The tale of the bell begins centuries ago, when the hill was not a place of dread, but a vibrant settlement. It was a peaceful village, tucked away in the valley, untouched by the turmoil that plagued the outside world. The people who lived here were simple, hard-working folk who paid homage to the gods of the forest and the earth. Their lives were quiet, their existence centered around the rhythms of the seasons, and their greatest joy was found in the harvests and the communal festivals that celebrated the bounty of nature. But as with all things that flourish, there came a time when the tranquility of the village was shattered. It was said that the first toll of the bell rang out on the night of the harvest festival, when the moon hung high in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the land. The villagers, gathered in merriment, were startled by the unexpected sound, its deep resonance filling the air with an unnatural heaviness. At first, they thought it was nothing more than a fluke, a strange sound borne on the wind, perhaps, or the ringing of a distant church bell. But as the night wore on, the tolling continued, growing louder with each passing hour. By the time the moon reached its zenith, the bell's toll was unmistakable. It was coming from the tower atop the hill. The villagers, curious but hesitant, sent a small group of brave souls to investigate. They climbed the winding path that led up the hill, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. When they reached the top, they found the bell tower empty, save for the single bell, which hung silently in the shadows. No one was there to ring it. The tower's mechanisms were rusted and broken, the ropes that should have pulled the bell lying in tatters on the ground. And yet, the bell had been ringing all night, echoing through the valley, calling out to the village. From that night forward, the tolls of the bell became a regular occurrence, always ringing on the eve of the harvest festival, but never again at any other time. The villagers, initially unnerved, began to grow accustomed to the sound, resigning themselves to its presence. But something in the air had changed. The crops that once flourished began to wither, and the animals that had once roamed freely now seemed restless, their movements erratic, as if they too had heard the bell and felt its ominous pull. As the years passed, the bell's toll became more insistent. The crops grew scarce, and the village began to fall into decline. Children grew sick, their health failing for reasons that no healer could explain. The elderly spoke of dreams, nightmares they called them, of shadows moving in the night, of eyes that glowed from the darkness, watching from the hill. Some claimed to have heard voices, faint whispers that drifted on the wind, speaking in a language that was foreign to their ears. And with each passing year, the toll of the bell grew louder, more powerful, as if it were calling them all to their doom. It was during one particularly harsh winter, when the snow blanketed the valley in a thick, unyielding layer, that the bell tolls ceased for the first time in decades. The villagers, desperate for a break from the constant fear that had plagued them, dared to hope. But their relief was short-lived. On the night the bell stopped ringing, a terrible tragedy struck. A fire broke out in the village, consuming entire homes, leaving only ashes in its wake. The fire spread with unnatural speed, as though something was feeding it, driving it to destroy everything in its path. No one could explain it. It was as though the very land itself had turned against them. As the fire raged on, the villagers gathered together in the square, waiting for the flames to subside. And then, just as the first light of dawn began to break through the smoke, the bell rang again. The sound, which had been silent for so long, pierced the air like a knife, its deep, sorrowful toll carrying across the valley. It was louder than ever before, a sound that seemed to shake the very earth beneath their feet. The villagers, terrified, fell to their knees, their hands pressed against their ears in a futile attempt to block out the sound. But it was no use. The bell continued to toll, each chime echoing through their hearts, reverberating in their souls. It was then that they understood. The bell did not toll because of the harvest. It tolled because of the land itself, a land that had been cursed long ago, its blood spilled in an ancient ritual. The bell had been forged to mark the anniversary of that curse, and with each toll, it reminded them of the price they had paid, of the souls who had been sacrificed in the name of power and greed. The bell's tolls had become more than just a signal of death. They had become a warning. a warning of the land's insatiable thirst for blood, and of the inevitable destruction that would come to those who dared to live on it. The villagers knew now that there was no escaping the curse of the Forgotten Hill. It had claimed them long ago, and now it would claim them again, as it had claimed the countless others before them. As the final toll of the bell rang out, the villagers looked to the hill one last time. They saw the tower, its shadow stretching long across the valley, and they knew that the bell would toll again, that it would always toll, until the land itself was cleansed of the darkness that had taken root in its soil. And when that day came, when the last of them had fallen to the curse, the bell would toll one final time, its sorrowful sound marking the end of a forgotten village lost to the wind and the night. Amid the desolate moors of Scotland, where the wind howls like a beast in torment, and the skies often threaten to break into endless sheets of rain, there stands a tower. It is called the Raven Tower, though no ravens have perched upon its crumbling stone for many years. The tower itself, silhouetted against the gray sky, looms as an ominous sentinel over the land, its crooked spire rising like a broken finger pointing toward the heavens. From a distance, it seems abandoned, forsaken by time. Yet those who have dared approach the tower know that there is something alive within its walls, a presence that has been haunting the moors for centuries. It is said that the bell atop the tower does not toll at regular intervals, like those in the village churches. No, the bell here rings only under specific, mysterious circumstances. When the winds are at their most violent, when the clouds gather with a particular kind of malevolence, and when the night is so thick with darkness that the stars themselves seem reluctant to shine. Then, and only then, does the bell ring, deep and mournful, a sound that is not of this world. Its toll is different from all others. It does not merely reverberate through the air. It shakes the earth beneath, its sound crawling into the very bones of anyone who hears it. The locals, the few who still live in the nearby village, speak of the tower in hushed tones. They whisper of the bloodshed that once stained its stones, of the dark rituals performed within its walls, and of the man who once called it home, a man whose name has been lost to history, but whose reputation still echoes in the whispers of the village. They call him the Raven King, for it is said that he was as cold and unfeeling as the black birds that once circled the tower, ever watchful, ever present. The Raven King was a ruler like no other, and his reign was marked by fear and darkness. He was not beloved by his people, nor did he seek their affection. Instead, he sought power, absolute, unchallenged power, and he was willing to sacrifice anything and anyone to obtain it. The tower, built during the height of his dominion, stood as a monument to his ambition, its bell ringing not to mark the passing of time, but to remind the people of his unyielding control. The Raven King's thirst for power led him down a path from which there was no return. It was said that, in his youth, he had encountered an ancient witch, one whose name had been lost in the centuries since, but whose influence was as undeniable as it was dangerous. She had offered him a gift, one that could grant him eternal life and unassailable strength, but at a terrible cost. The Raven King, ever the yacht's pragmatist, accepted her offer without hesitation. What followed was a series of strange events, unexplained phenomena that gripped the land like a fever. Crops failed, animals turned savage, and the villagers grew sick with fear. But the Raven King did not care. He grew more powerful with each passing day, his rule becoming more tyrannical, his actions more cruel. As his power grew, so did the legend of the Raven Tower. The tower itself became a dark symbol, its bell tolling whenever the king's will was imposed, whenever a life was taken to fuel his insatiable hunger for more. Those who crossed him were brought to the tower, where they were executed in cruel and twisted ways, their bodies left to rot in the shadow of the bell that tolled above. The tolls, once a sign of royal authority, began to take on a more sinister meaning. As the Raven King's lust for power deepened, so did his desperation. It was said that he sought to capture the souls of the slain, to bind them to the tower, so that their energy could sustain his own. The bell, ever vigilant, tolled with each sacrifice, its sound growing darker, more haunting, as though it itself were aware of the evil it had come to represent. It rang out across the moors, a call to arms for those brave enough, or foolish enough, to challenge the king. But even the Raven King could not escape the inevitability of time. As the years passed, his power began to wane. His body, once strong and unyielding, began to betray him. His mind, too, grew clouded with paranoia, as though the very land itself was turning against him. And so, in his final years, the king retreated into the tower, leaving his subjects to fend for themselves. The toll of the bell became more erratic, tolling at strange hours, sometimes in the dead of night, sometimes in the early hours of the morning, when the darkness still held sway over the land. One night, the bell tolled for the last time. The villagers, who had long feared the king's reign, waited in silence, knowing that something had shifted, that the end was near. The wind howled through the moors, the sky dark with the promise of a storm. Then, in the stillness of the night, the bell rang once more. A sound so loud, so final, that it rattled the windows of every house in the village. The villagers, too afraid to move, huddled together, clutching their loved ones, as the toll echoed through the valley. At dawn, the tower was found abandoned, the bell hanging silent in its tower. The Raven King was gone, his body never found, though some claim to have seen his shadow moving among the ruins in the years that followed. The tower, however, stood empty, its bell untouched. But the villagers knew that something had been left behind. The curse of the Raven King had not died with him. The tolls, though rare, continued. On certain nights, when the wind howled and the air was thick with dread, the bell would ring again, calling out to those who dared to listen. And when it did, the villagers knew that something, someone, had stirred within the tower. The curse of the Raven King was not so easily undone. It lingered in the air like a forgotten memory, a dark echo of a time when power was taken at any cost. Some say that the bell still tolls, though no one has dared to verify it. Those who venture too close to the tower often disappear, their fates sealed by the same curse that once gripped the Raven King. The tower, now a ruin, stands as a silent witness to a time long past, a monument to ambition and greed, its bell tolling only for those who dare to challenge its shadow. And so, the Raven Tower remains, its bell tolling through the mists of time, echoing the whispers of a dark history that refuses to be forgotten. Those who hear it, if they are brave enough to listen, will know that some curses never fade. They only grow stronger, tolling for the souls yet to come, tucked away in the shadow of the Sierra Madre Mountains in Mexico. There lies a village so remote, so enshrouded in secrecy, that it exists only in whispered legends and ghostly tales. This village, known as La Calavera, is a place where the echoes of the past reverberate through the land, a place where every stone, every tree, every gust of wind seems steeped in mystery. The most unsettling of the village's mysteries, however, is not its isolation or its fog-laden streets. It is the haunting toll of its church bells. The bells of La Calavera ring only at night, when the moon is hidden behind thick clouds and the wind carries with it the scent of death. They toll once and only once, marking a moment of finality that no one can ignore. Those who have heard the bells speak of a chilling, otherworldly tone, deep and resonant, as if the bell itself carries the weight of centuries of sorrow. The sound does not reverberate through the village like a normal bell toll. No, it is as if the bell's tone strikes the very air, sinking into the bones of all who hear it. The moment it rings, the villagers know that death is near. The origin of this curse dates back to the early days of La Calavera, when the village was a thriving community of farmers, artisans, and traders, nestled in the fertile lands of the Sierra Madre foothills. The people lived simple, content lives, untouched by the outside world, their greatest concerns centered around the rhythms of the seasons and the health of their crops. But as in all peaceful places, peace was never meant to last. It was said that the first toll of the bell occurred on the night of the village's greatest celebration, a festival that honored the harvest, when the entire village gathered to dance, feast, and give thanks for the fruits of their labor. That night, the sky had been clear, the stars shining brightly, and the air was warm with the scent of roasting meats and sweet fruit. But as the festival reached its peak, the bell tolled, a single deep chime that sliced through the joy like a blade. For a moment, everything fell silent. The music stopped, the laughter ceased, and in the stillness, the villagers turned their eyes toward the church. They saw nothing amiss. The church stood empty, its bell tower as still and silent as it had always been. But from that moment on, strange things began to happen. The village's crops began to wither, animals grew sickly, and children fell ill with mysterious fevers that no healer could cure. The villagers, desperate for answers, turned to the elders, those who remembered the old ways, those who still honored the ancient rituals of the land. It was then that they heard the story of the bell, a story that had been whispered from generation to generation, a story so steeped in darkness that it had been nearly forgotten. The bell, it was said, had been forged long ago by a powerful and feared witch who had once lived in the mountains. Her name, if it had ever been known, was lost to time. But the villagers spoke of her power in hushed tones. She was a woman who had mastered the ancient arts of magic, a woman who could bend the very forces of nature to her will. The witch, as the story went, had once lived in La Calavera, but her power had grown so great that it had drawn the attention of the church. Fearing her influence, the church had sought to destroy her, but the witch had foreseen this. Before they could reach her, she had vanished into the mountains, leaving behind only the toll of her bell as a warning. It was said that, with her last breath, she cursed the bell, binding it to the land, to the people, and to death itself. Each toll of the bell was said to mark the passing of a soul. But it wasn't just the death of anyone. It was the death of someone fated, someone whose time had come, whether they knew it or not. And the bell did not toll only for those who had lived full lives. It tolled for the young, the innocent, the ones who had been taken too soon. Once the bell tolled, it was as if death itself was set into motion, pulling the soul from the body as the village held its breath in sorrowful anticipation. The moment the bell rang, the villagers knew that one of them would be lost. As the years passed, the bell's toll became an ominous and inevitable part of life in La Calavera. The village grew to dread the sound, yet it became ingrained in their lives. The villagers knew that no matter how careful they were, no matter how hard they prayed, the bell would toll again. There was no escaping it. And so, they learned to live with it. But it was during the darkest days of the village's history that the bell's true power was revealed. In the wake of a brutal war that ravaged the land, La Calavera found itself overrun with refugees. Desperate and starving, they begged the villagers for shelter, for safety. The village's leaders, unwilling to turn away those in need, opened their doors to the strangers, offering them food and a place to rest. But the bell tolled that night. The next morning, the villagers woke to find that half of the refugees had disappeared, their bodies gone without a trace. No one knew where they had gone or how they had vanished. But the bell tolled again. The sound echoed across the village like a death knell, signaling the loss of another soul, another victim to the curse that had bound the bell. It wasn't long before the village fell into despair. The people, once united by their community and faith, began to turn on one another. Whispers spread that the curse had grown stronger, that the bell was no longer just tolling for the dying, but for the living as well. People began to disappear, their bodies found in the most unnatural of places, their deaths marked by the toll of the bell. Those who remained feared what would come next, fearing that the bell would call them too, would summon them to its unyielding grasp. The villagers, desperate to end the curse, turned to the old ways. They sought the counsel of shamans and witches, but all were silent, for none could undo the power that had been forged into the bell. The church, too, had tried to destroy it, but the bell remained, unbroken and unyielding. And so, La Calavera became a village shrouded in fear, a place where no one dared venture after dark, for the toll of the bell was always looming in the distance. And so, the curse of the bells of La Calavera continues, tolling for those who have yet to meet their fate, calling out into the night for those who will never return. When the bell rings, the villagers know what it means. They know that death has come, not just for one, but for all of them. The curse has not been lifted. It will never be lifted. And the toll will continue to echo through the land, a reminder of the power of a curse that cannot be undone. The winds of Ireland have a way of carrying secrets. They weave through the ancient stone walls of forgotten castles and the damp, moss-covered ruins of what was once civilization. But there is one place where the winds seem to whisper a little louder, a little longer, as if they too are reluctant to move on, held captive by a place where time has stopped. This place, perched on the edge of a barren hill, is known only as Hollow's Reach, a name given by the locals long ago, a name wrapped in a shroud of fear and superstition. Hollow's Reach is a tower, though calling it a tower is generous. Its stones are blackened by centuries of neglect, its once grand silhouette now but a jagged line against the sky. Yet there is something undeniably magnetic about it, something that calls to those brave enough, or foolish enough, to venture too close. For the people who live in the surrounding village, Hollow's Reach is a reminder of a time when power and greed held sway over the land. And it is also a reminder of the curse that still lingers there. An ancient curse tied to the very foundation of the tower itself. Long ago, before the tower had fallen into disrepair, it was the home of a lord. Lord Aiden, a man whose name has lived on through whispers, yet whose story has been lost to the ages. Some say that Lord Aiden was a just ruler, fair and kind, beloved by his people. Others tell a far darker tale, that Aiden was a man consumed by ambition, a man willing to sacrifice everything, even his own soul, to secure his place in history. Whichever story is true, there is no denying that the events that unfolded at Hollow's Reach would forever change the village below, and would echo across the centuries with a toll that none could ignore. The tale begins with a pact, one that Aiden, in his unrelenting desire for power, made with forces beyond his understanding. In the quiet of his chamber, under the flickering light of candle flames, Aiden met a figure cloaked in shadow, a mysterious stranger whose voice seemed to carry the weight of ages. This stranger, with eyes as dark as the night itself, offered Aiden a gift, the ability to rule not just the land he held, but to extend his power beyond death, to control the very spirits of those who had fallen in battle and in betrayal. It was a gift of great promise, but it came with a price that Aiden would soon regret paying. In his hubris, Aiden agreed, sealing the pact with a drop of his own blood, binding his soul to the forces that lingered in the void between life and death. The stranger, satisfied, left with no trace but the lingering scent of incense and the echo of Aiden's own name whispered in the wind. At first, the Lord felt no change. His power grew, yes, but so too did the darkness that settled over his heart. The once serene and peaceful landscape around Hollow's Reach began to take on a sinister air, as if the land itself was responding to the curse Aiden had invited. The villagers began to notice strange occurrences. Shadows moved where no shadows should have been. Animals that ventured near the tower returned wild-eyed and frantic, often finding their way home only to collapse in terror, too afraid to speak of what they had seen. But it wasn't until the bell tolled for the first time that the villagers truly understood what had been unleashed upon them. The bell, once silent for years, rang out across the valley one cold autumn night, its deep, sonorous tone echoing through the air like the roar of thunder. But it was not thunder. It was the bell at Hollow's Reach, and its toll marked the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt the land forever. The villagers, terrified, gathered in the square, their faces pale as the sound of the bell reverberated through their bones. They knew, even before the first body was found, that the toll was not an ordinary event. It was a signal, a sign that something dark and ancient had awoken. The first death came swiftly. A young man, eager to prove himself in the fields, was found the next morning in the shadow of the tower, his body twisted and broken as though he had fallen from a great height. His neck was snapped, his eyes wide, with terror, as if something had reached inside him and torn him apart. There was no explanation, no obvious cause of death. But the villagers knew one thing for certain. The bell had tolled, and now the death that followed was not an accident. It was a consequence. One by one, the bodies piled up. At first, it was only the young, those who had ventured too close to Hollow's Reach, lured by the tolling bell that seemed to call to them, promising secrets and truths hidden beneath its darkened shadow. But soon, the tolling bell began to claim older souls too. The elderly, the weak, the ones who had lived in the village for generations. No one was safe from the toll. It seemed as though the bell was singling out those who were most vulnerable, pulling them into the tower's dark embrace, where death awaited them in the cold and unforgiving night. Despite the growing death toll, no one dared approach the tower. The villagers, once proud and defiant, now lived in fear, their eyes always casting nervously toward the hills. Some tried to break the curse, but every effort was in vain. The bell continued to toll, and the death continued to come. Even the bravest of warriors, those who had fought in countless battles, refused to set foot near Hollow's Reach. They knew that to enter the tower was to invite death, a death not just of the body, but of the soul itself. As the years passed, the tolling bell became a constant presence in the village. The villagers learned to live with it, their lives marked by its sound. They no longer questioned its existence. They no longer spoke of it. It had become a part of the very air they breathed, an ominous reminder of the pact that had been made and the price that had been paid. But even in the shadow of the tower, whispers began to circulate. There were those who claimed that the bell was not merely a harbinger of death, it was a call to those who were bound to the tower, whose souls had been claimed by Heighten's pact with the stranger. These souls, it was said, still lingered within the tower, trapped in an eternal prison of their own making. And the bell tolled to summon them back to the world of the living, to claim the souls of the living, to join them in their torment. It was then that a small group of brave souls, led by a man who had lost everything to the curse, made their way to the tower. They believed that they could break the curse, that they could finally end the reign of terror that had gripped their village for so long. Armed with nothing but their courage, they climbed the winding path toward Hollow's Reach, the tolling bell ringing relentlessly in the distance. They reached the tower just as the moon began to rise, casting an eerie glow over the land. Inside the tower, they found what they had feared, a darkness so deep it consumed everything in its path. The walls of the tower were covered in strange symbols, etched into the stone by a hand long dead. At the base of the tower stood a massive door, sealed shut by the weight of centuries. But as they approached, the door opened on its own, revealing the truth of what lay inside. It was not the bell that had caused the deaths, but the curse that had been placed upon the land, a curse that could never be broken. As they entered the tower, they knew that they were not alone. The air was thick with the presence of something ancient, something powerful. The bell tolled once more, its sound echoing through the tower, and they knew that the curse would never end, not until the last soul claimed by the tower had found peace. And so, Hollow's Reach stands still today, its tower casting its long shadow over the valley, its bell tolling in the distance, marking the passage of time. The curse remains, as it always has, a silent witness to a time when ambition consumed the soul of a lord, and death became an uninvited guest. The tolling bell is a reminder that some pacts cannot be undone, that some forces are too powerful to escape, and that the past will always call us back, no matter how far we try to run. In the quiet, forgotten corners of southern France, beyond the rolling hills and into a valley veiled in mist, there lies a place untouched by time and human progress. It is a valley, so hidden in nature's embrace that even the sun seems hesitant to penetrate its depths. This valley, known only as the Hollowed Hollow, is not marked on any map, nor is it often spoken of in the villages that dot the surrounding land. Yet for those few who know of it, the Hollowed Hollow is a place steeped in secrets, secrets that can never be untold, no matter how hard one may try. At the heart of the hollow stands a long-forgotten church, its once proud bell tower now a crumbling skeleton of stone. The church itself is a ruin, its walls weathered by centuries of neglect, its windows shattered, allowing the wind to whistle through the empty frames. Yet there is one thing that remains undisturbed: the bell that hangs high in the tower, silent but never still. The villagers who live in the distant villages, if they are brave enough to speak of the hollow, do so only in hushed tones, The toll of the bell, they say, is not just a signal of passing time. It is a harbinger, a warning of something far more sinister that lurks beneath the soil. The first toll of the bell came long ago, on a moonless night, when a group of travelers, weary and lost, found themselves wandering into the valley. These travelers, having been separated from the main road, stumbled across the desolate church while seeking shelter from a storm. The valley was eerily quiet. The only sound the soft patter of rain against the leaves and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. As they approached the church, the bell tolled, once deep and resonant, a single chime that cut through the quiet like a knife. Curious and seeking shelter, the travelers ventured inside the church. There they found nothing unusual, only the remnants of a place long abandoned, with dust and cobwebs filling the air. They decided to rest there for the night, unaware that their presence had awakened something long dormant. For when the bell tolled once more, it did not toll in the peaceful rhythm of a church bell. It rang with a force that seemed to shake the very foundations of the valley. That night, as the travelers slept, strange things began to happen. One of them, a young woman named Elise, awoke to the sound of whispering voices, their words incomprehensible, carried on the wind. At first, she thought it was the storm, the rain, the rustling of the trees. But when she opened her eyes, she saw something far worse. A shadow moving in the corner of the room, a shadow that seemed to flicker and shift as if it were alive. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to call out to her companions. But when she spoke, no sound came from her lips. As she turned toward the door, she saw that the bell had begun to toll again, louder, more insistent. Each chime seemed to echo through the very air, the vibrations crawling into her bones, filling her with an overwhelming sense of dread. The shadow grew larger, its shape becoming more defined, more solid, and before she could comprehend what was happening, it reached out to her. The next morning, the travelers found Elise gone, vanished without a trace. They searched the church and the valley for hours, but there was no sign of her. The bell, which had tolled once during the night, was silent once more, but the atmosphere in the hollowed hollow had changed. There was something unnatural in the air, something that gripped the travelers' hearts with a cold, unyielding fear. With no other choice but to leave, they fled the valley, never to speak of what they had witnessed again. It wasn't long before rumors began to spread. The villagers who lived nearby spoke in hushed tones of the strange events that occurred in the hollowed hollow. They claimed that the bell tolled for those who were marked, that it called out to those whose time had come, but not in the way of a normal bell. No, the bell's toll was a curse. It marked the arrival of the spirits who had been long dead, the ones whose souls were bound to the land, to the church, to the bell itself. The tale of the hollowed hollow became legend, passed down through generations, until the very name of the valley became synonymous with death and misfortune. Some claimed that the valley itself was cursed, that the land had been stained by a dark history of violence and betrayal. The church, once a place of worship, had been the site of a terrible massacre centuries ago. A massacre so brutal and senseless that the blood of the slain had seeped into the very earth, forever binding their souls to the land. The bell, it was said, was the instrument of this curse, tolling for those whose deaths had not been avenged, whose spirits could not rest. Over the years, those brave enough to venture into the hollowed hollow, often travelers, seekers of hidden places, or those drawn by the pull of the curse, disappeared without a trace. It was as if the valley had swallowed them whole, as if the land itself had claimed them as its own. Some came searching for the truth, hoping to break the curse, to silence the bell once and for all. But none ever returned. The tolling bell had become an irreversible part of the valley's identity, a sound that no one could escape, no one could outrun. It was a sound that marked the passing of souls, a reminder that the valley had a claim over life and death alike. And so, over time, the hollowed hollow was abandoned by the living. No one dared to settle near it, and the once thriving villages on the outskirts of the valley gradually fell into ruin, their inhabitants driven away by the fear of the tolling bell and the dark legends surrounding it. The church, now a crumbling monument to the past, stood empty, its bell silent, at least for a time. But the valley's hold on the land was not easily broken. In the dead of night, when the moon was obscured by clouds and the wind howled like a lost soul, the bell would toll once more. Its sound, deep and mournful, would echo through the valley, carrying with it the weight of centuries of forgotten deaths, of spirits trapped between life and the afterlife, of souls who had never found peace. The tolls were few and far between, but they came with an undeniable certainty. The valley, it seemed, could not be denied its due. The tolling bell of the hollowed hollow is not just a marker of death. It is a reminder that some places are never truly abandoned. They are haunted by the weight of history, by the blood spilled upon their soil, and by the curses bound to the land itself. In the hollowed hollow, the past never dies. It waits patiently for the next soul to wander too close, for the bell to toll once more, for the darkness to rise again. And so, as the fog rolls in and the winds whip through the valley, the bell tolls. It tolls for the lost, the forgotten, and the damned. It tolls, forever echoing in the land, marking the hollow place where the living dare not tread, where death's grip tightens with each passing night. There is an old superstition that holds sway in the darkest corners of the world, one that has haunted the dreams of countless generations. It speaks of a bell that tolls at midnight, but not just any bell. This bell tolls for the living and the dead alike, its deep, echoing sound signaling that death has come, not for the old, the sick, or the weary, but for the ones who least expect it, the ones whose lives are yet to be fully lived. It is said that when the bell tolls at midnight, someone will die. No one knows why, no one knows how, but those who have lived through it know one thing for sure. The toll is not to be ignored. In the small town of Barrow's End, this superstition had been passed down for as long as anyone could remember. The townspeople, most of whom had lived there for generations, knew the story well. It was a story whispered in fear, spoken only in the quietest of tones, as though speaking too loudly might summon the toll of the bell itself. The story had been told and retold, growing more twisted with each telling, until it had become a legend, a tale of terror woven into the very fabric of the town. The origins of the bell were lost to time, but according to the oldest residents, the bell had been hung in the tower of St. Barrow's Church, the very heart of the town, over 2 centuries ago. The church had been built in the early days of Barrow's End, during a time when the town was just beginning to take shape. It was a modest place of worship, built by the first settlers as a symbol of their faith, a place where the community could come together in prayer and unity. But there was something dark in the soil of Barrow's End, a darkness that seeped into the foundations of the church, something that no amount of prayers could expel. It is said that the first toll of the bell came on a night much like any other. The town was asleep, its streets bathed in moonlight, the air thick with the scent of the earth. But at the stroke of midnight, the bell tolled once, deep, resonant, and full of foreboding. No one knew why it tolled, but the people awoke to find that the bell had called someone's death. A young woman, by the name of Mary Ellsworth, was found the next morning, lifeless in her bed, her face frozen in an expression of sheer terror. Her family, stunned and horrified, could not explain it. She had been healthy, vibrant, with no sign of illness or injury. Her death was as inexplicable as it was tragic. But the townspeople knew. Mary had been claimed by the bell. As time went on, the bell tolled again, and again, and again. The bell's toll became an ominous presence in the town, a sound that filled the hearts of the people with dread, no matter how long they had lived with it. It tolling was a warning, a herald of the coming death. The bell did not toll for the sick or the old, as one might expect. No, it tolls for those who are still in their prime, those whose lives are not yet finished, those whose potential is still untapped. The toll is not kind. It does not spare those who deserve it, nor does it warn those who are meant to escape. It comes for the innocent as much as the guilty, for the bell cares nothing for age, station, or virtue. It tolls for them all. One by one, the townspeople began to grow fearful. Those who had once dared to venture into the church at midnight found themselves drawn back again and again, unable to resist the pull of the bell. They whispered that the bell had a mind of its own, that it called to the souls of the dead, marking those whose lives had been stolen by some unseen hand. Yet there was no explanation for it. The bell never tolled for those who had lived full lives, for those who had reached the end of their days. It tolls only for the unsuspecting. It tolls for the young, the strong, the healthy. It tolls for those who had no idea that their time was coming. By the time the next toll came, the town had begun to lose its sense of safety. The bell tolls had taken the lives of the town's brightest, their strongest, their most beloved. The streets grew quieter. The church, once a place of gathering, became a place of mourning, its doors closed for months at a time. The once vibrant community began to dwindle, people fleeing in fear of what the toll would bring next. Even the bravest of men, who had once walked with confidence through the town, now cast nervous glances toward the church as they hurried past. The bell hung in the tower, silent and watchful, its toll ever looming in the distance, its power growing with each passing year. But it was on a night that no one expected that the bell tolled again. This time, it tolls for someone who had thought themselves immune to its curse. A man named Thomas Calder, the town's mayor, a man of considerable influence and power. Thomas had always thought that the bell was a superstition, a myth perpetuated by those who feared what they did not understand. He had laughed at the stories, had mocked the idea that something so simple as a bell could hold any real power. But that night, when the clock struck 12, the bell tolled for him. Thomas awoke with a start, his heart racing, his body slick with sweat. He had heard the bell, of course. It was impossible not to. It sounded so loud, so deep, that it rattled the very foundations of the town. For a moment, he lay in bed, paralyzed by fear, unsure of what to do. He had no doubt now, not after all that had happened, that the bell tolled for him. He had been marked. He had been chosen. Panicked, Thomas rushed through the streets, his mind racing as he made his way toward the church. He tried to convince himself that he was only being irrational, that there was no truth to the curse that had haunted the town for so long. But as he reached the church, his breath quickening, his chest tight, he could feel it, feel the weight of something watching him, waiting. The bell tolled again, this time louder than before. Thomas turned, his face pale, his hands shaking, and for the first time, he truly understood the curse that had been cast upon the town. The bell was not just a herald of death. It was death itself. By the time the morning light touched the horizon, Thomas was gone. The town awoke to find him missing, his bed empty, his clothes discarded in haste. His disappearance, like those before him, was inexplicable. There was no trace of him anywhere. It was as if he had simply vanished, as though the very earth had swallowed him whole. The bell, too, was silent now. It had tolled its final toll. But the town was no safer. The curse had not lifted. For the bell, though silent, was not gone. It would toll again when the time was right, when another soul was ready to join the others claimed by its mournful sound. And so, the legend continued. The bell, ever patient, ever waiting, would toll again at midnight, and the cycle would begin anew. In the dense jungles of Central America, where the air hangs thick with humidity and the cries of unseen creatures reverberate through the trees, lies the remains of a lost civilization. The ancient city, its name lost to time, was once a kingdom of immense power and grandeur, a civilization that flourished for centuries before it disappeared without a trace, swallowed by the jungle as if it had never existed. But amid the ruins of its once proud structures, one thing remains. A bell forged from a metal so strange, so alien, that it has never been fully understood. And when it tolls, the earth trembles, and the whispers of a forgotten age stir once more. The story of this bell is one steeped in myth, surrounded by a shroud of mystery and speculation. The kingdom that once thrived in these jungles was known for its advanced knowledge of astronomy, its mastery over the natural world, and its wealth that came from the riches of the land. The people who inhabited the city were said to possess knowledge that surpassed even the greatest minds of the ancient world. They built temples that reached for the heavens, crafted intricate works of art, and governed their people with wisdom and strength. But for all their achievements, they paid a terrible price for their ambition. As the legend goes, the bell was created by the kingdom's high priests, who sought to harness the power of the stars. The priests, who had long studied the movements of the heavens and the cycles of the earth, believed that they could control the forces of nature by forging a bell that could call upon the power of the gods themselves. It was said that the bell was cast during a rare celestial alignment, when the stars themselves seemed to form a perfect pattern across the night sky. The metal from which the bell was made was not of this world, a substance so rare that it could only have come from the heavens. The high priests, in their arrogance, believed that the bell would grant them control over time itself. They believed that by ringing it, they could summon the gods and bend the very fabric of reality to their will. But the bell's toll was not what they had expected. Instead of summoning the gods, it summoned something far darker, something that had been waiting for centuries in the shadows of the jungle. The bell's first toll, deep and resonant, echoed across the land, shaking the foundations of the city. And with it came a force so malevolent that it tore the kingdom apart. It is said that the night the bell first tolled, the sky grew dark, as if the very stars themselves had abandoned the world. The earth trembled and the ground cracked open, swallowing entire temples and palaces in an instant. A storm, like none ever seen before, ravaged the city, its winds howling like the screams of the damned. Lightning struck the tallest structures, setting them aflame, while the people, caught in the chaos, ran in every direction, searching for safety that was never to come. The gods, it seemed, had turned their backs on the kingdom. And the bell tolled again, louder this time, its sound ringing out across the jungle like a death knell for an entire civilization. The kingdom, once vibrant and full of life, was reduced to rubble in a matter of hours. The jungles quickly reclaimed the land, and the city was swallowed by the earth, its ruins buried beneath thick layers of vegetation. The bell, now silent, stood as the only reminder of the kingdom's once glorious past. For centuries, it remained undisturbed, its toll forgotten by all who came after. But the bell was never truly silent. It had been waiting for the right moment to toll again. It was not until modern-day explorers stumbled upon the ruins of the lost kingdom that the bell was rediscovered. The explorers, led by a team of archaeologists, had been tracking the remnants of the ancient city for years, drawn to the legend of the kingdom's demise and the mysterious bell that had been said to hold the key to its destruction. The team, armed with tools and equipment, ventured deep into the jungle, cutting their way through the dense foliage that had long since overtaken the ruins. As they approached the heart of the city, they found the bell. It stood at the center of what had once been a grand temple, its massive form half buried in the earth, the strange metal gleaming faintly in the filtered sunlight. The archaeologists marveled at the bell, but none of them dared to touch it. The air around it seemed thick with an unseen force, and there was something about the bell that filled them with an overwhelming sense of unease. One of the team members, a young archaeologist named Emily, was particularly fascinated by the bell. She had spent years studying ancient civilizations, and this discovery, she knew, would make her career. But as the team gathered around the bell, Emily's curiosity got the better of her. She stepped forward, her fingers trembling as she reached out to touch the bell's surface. The moment her fingers made contact, a low hum began to reverberate through the ground beneath them. The sound was soft at first, barely noticeable, but it quickly grew louder, building to a deep, resonant tone that seemed to shake the very air. And then, the bell tolled. The sound was deafening, a deep, booming toll that echoed through the jungle like thunder. The ground beneath the archaeologists trembled, and the air seemed to grow thick with heat. The trees around them began to sway violently, their branches twisting and groaning as though they were alive. The sky darkened, and the storm that had once consumed the ancient city began to stir again. Emily and the rest of the team stood frozen in place, their hearts racing as they watched the world around them begin to unravel. As the bell tolled, the jungle seemed to come alive with a malevolent energy. The ground cracked open in places, revealing dark, swirling chasms beneath the surface. The trees groaned as if in pain, their roots twisting and pulling at the earth. Strange shadows moved within the depths of the jungle, and distant, unearthly cries echoed through the air. It was as though the very land itself was reacting to the toll of the bell, shaking off the centuries of silence that had bound it. Terrified, the archaeologists scrambled to flee, but the jungle seemed to fight against them. The very ground they walked upon seemed to shift and buckle, making it nearly impossible to navigate. The storm raged overhead, the wind howling as if angry at the intrusion. The toll of the bell continued, louder now, as though it were calling out to something, or someone, waiting deep within the jungle. Emily, her heart pounding in her chest, found herself stumbling through the underbrush, the sound of the bell ringing in her ears. She could hear the others calling out for her, but their voices were drowned out by the deafening toll. She pressed on, her legs aching, her breath coming in ragged gasps. It wasn't until she reached the edge of the jungle, the ruins of the lost city fading behind her, that the toll finally stopped. The sound, as sudden as it had begun, fell into an eerie silence. The storm dissipated, and the jungle seemed to settle back into its usual stillness. The archaeologists, now scattered and shaken, gathered together. They had survived, but they all knew that something had been awakened. Something dark, something ancient, and something that had been waiting for the right moment to return. The bell of the lost kingdom had tolled once again, and in doing so, it had unraveled the veil that had kept the curse bound for centuries. And so, the bell waits. Though its toll has fallen silent once more, it will not remain so forever. When the stars align again, when the right soul comes close enough to touch the bell, it will toll once more, and the earth will tremble beneath its sound. The lost kingdom is not truly lost. It is only waiting. And when it calls again, the world will hear its call. In every corner of the earth, in the darkest places where shadows cling to ancient stone and silence reigns, there is a bell that tolls in the darkest hours, a bell that calls not just for the end of life, but for the end of everything. These bells are not ordinary, nor are they merely symbols of death. They are the harbingers of fate, the summoners of souls, the bringers of endings. For every time they toll, it is not just the passing of a life they mark, but the crossing of a threshold between worlds. It is a moment of reckoning, a moment where the line between the living and the dead is forever blurred. The bells that rang before death were not found in places of mourning alone. They did not toll only when the sick or the old passed away. No, these bells tolled for the unsuspecting, the ones who believed they had more time, the ones whose lives had not yet been finished. And it was in the toll of these bells, deep in the quiet of the night, that the true nature of death revealed itself. Not as a cruel thief who stole away with years, but as something much darker, more patient, more inevitable. There was a time, centuries ago, when the tolling of such bells could be heard across the land. In a small village nestled at the edge of an ancient forest, there stood a church, a place of refuge and solace, where the people of the town could gather for prayer, for peace, and for remembrance. It was a quiet place, where time seemed to slow, where the world outside felt far away, and where the only sounds were the rustling of the leaves and the steady toll of the church bell marking the hours. But there was something different about this bell. It had been cast centuries earlier by a blacksmith who had long since passed, and it had been placed in the church tower, high above the village. Its tone was deep and resounding, its sound so rich that it seemed to resonate not just in the air, but in the very bones of those who heard it. There was no mistaking the toll of this bell. It was not like the soft, distant chimes of other bells, nor was it like the rhythm of the passing hours. This bell tolled when something darker stirred, a call to the unknown. It was said that the bell's toll was not just a signal of time passing, but of a coming death. Those who had lived in the village for generations knew the truth, even if they would not speak of it aloud. They knew that when the bell tolled in the middle of the night, it was not just an ordinary tolling. It was the death knell, and it always rang before a life was taken. At first, it seemed like nothing more than superstition. The villagers would wake in the dead of night, startled by the deep toll of the bell. They would whisper to each other, afraid to admit what they knew. Then, in the morning, they would learn that someone, usually someone young, someone with a future, had passed away in their sleep. It was always the same. The bell tolled, and the death followed. It seemed as though the bell was a prelude to the inevitable, a sign of what was to come. The people of the village, frightened but unsure, tried to avoid the bell's toll by staying indoors, by closing their windows, by praying louder, by hoping that they would not be the next to hear it. But the toll would come regardless. And when it did, they knew their fate was sealed. One such toll came on a night when the moon was veiled by thick clouds, the air heavy with moisture and tension. The village had been restless, and the people spoke in hushed tones about the strange happenings that had occurred in the days leading up to the toll. A child had disappeared from the village without a trace, and another had fallen ill with no explanation. The village was on edge, and when the bell tolled that night, no one dared to move, for they knew that someone else had been chosen. It was a young woman named Isolde, whose life would be claimed that night. Isolde had been the heart of the village, known for her laughter, her kindness, and her beauty. She was the daughter of the village healer, and many came to her family's home seeking help. She had just begun to bloom into adulthood, her life filled with promise and adventure. But as the bell tolled that night, Isolde's fate was sealed. She had been walking home from the forest, where she had been gathering herbs with her mother, when the toll of the bell echoed through the trees. At first, she had paused, bewildered by the sound. It was not the usual toll for the hour, but a deeper, more resounding sound. A chill ran through her, as though the very earth had shifted beneath her feet. She looked up, half expecting to see some shadowy figure watching her from the edge of the trees. But there was nothing. Only the thick night, the damp air, and the tolling of the bell. Her steps grew slower, and she felt an unease stir within her. She quickened her pace, hoping to reach the safety of her home before the bell rang again. But as she neared the village square, she stumbled. Her vision blurred, her knees buckled beneath her. The bell tolled once more, a sound so deep it seemed to reverberate through her very soul. And then, with one final breath, she collapsed to the ground, lifeless. The villagers, when they found her the next morning, could not understand it. There were no marks on her body, no signs of struggle, no illness. It was as though life had simply drained from her in an instant, leaving her cold and lifeless. Her mother wept, but there was no answer to her sorrow. The bell had tolled, and now her daughter was gone. But even after Isolde's death, the tolling bell did not cease. It tolled again for the next victim, then the next. The villagers began to wonder if they could escape the bell's grasp. Some left, moving far away, hoping to outrun the toll. But no matter where they went, they could still hear it. Soft at first, a distant hum in the back of their minds, and then growing louder as it approached. It was as though the bell followed them. A ghostly echo, a sound that would not be silenced. The town grew quieter as people disappeared. Those who remained would still wake at midnight, staring out the window, hoping that this time they would not be the ones to answer the call. But the toll of the bell never stopped. It rang out with the passing of time, with the ticking of the clock, a reminder that death had no respect for age, no consideration for youth, no mercy for the innocent. It came for them all. The bell did not simply toll for the passing of one life. It was the sound of fate itself, a warning that death would claim those who were not yet ready, that time could not be bargained with or avoided. Each toll marked a soul's departure from the world, a soul being drawn from the living into the realm of the unknown. The bell rang again, and the world stood still. Those who had heard it understood. No one could escape it. No one was beyond its reach. The bell tolled again, not for the dead, but for the living, calling them toward their final end.